Chief Security Officer Xarleth's crystalline appendages trembled as she reviewed the latest report from Earth. In her centuries of service to the Galactic Security Council, she had never seen probability curves like these. They didn't just defy explanation. They defied reality itself. "Play the surveillance recording again," she commanded, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that conveyed deep concern. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the interior of a human research facility. Dr. Sarah Chen, lead scientist of Project Probability, stood before a strange apparatus that seemed to bend light around itself. "Trial 47 of the Probability Manipulation Engine," Dr. Chen announced to her team, her excitement barely contained. "Today we're attempting to alter the quantum probability state of a single electron to achieve what we're calling preferred outcome manipulation." She paused, adjusting her safety goggles, or as Dr. Martinez likes to call it, telling the universe what we want and making it listen. Xarleth's crystalline structure vibrated with anxiety. The humans weren't just playing with fire. They were trying to redesign how it burned. The recording continued as Dr. Chen activated the device. The air itself seemed to ripple, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but somehow wrong. Numbers and probability calculations floated across the holographic display, showing impossible readings. The electron they were observing wasn't just shifting between quantum states, it was existing in states that shouldn't have been possible. "By the first law," Xarleth whispered, "they've done it. They've actually done it." The door to her office chimed, announcing the arrival of senior council member Vexthor. His gaseous form swirled with patterns that indicated extreme agitation. "Tell me the reports are wrong, Xarleth. Tell me the humans haven't discovered probability manipulation." "Not only have they discovered it," Xarleth replied, her voice modulating to convey resignation, "they're already experimenting with practical applications. This recording was taken 3 Earth days ago." Vexthor's gaseous form condensed in shock. 3 days. The calculations suggested we had years before they reached this level of understanding. How did they? Someone asked what the worst that could happen was. Xarleth interrupted, her crystalline structure taking on a deeper hue of concern. Specifically, Dr. Martinez asked what the worst that could happen would be if they ignored quantum limitations and tried to force probability to behave the way they wanted it to. The room temperature dropped several degrees as Vexthor processed this information. Don't they understand? The warning protocol exists for a reason. Every species that has ever asked that question while conducting dimensional research has either destroyed themselves or created something they couldn't control. Xarleth. Finish. Yes, I know. That's why the protocol was established. But humans are different. They don't just ask what's the worst that could happen. They treat it as a challenge to prove they can handle whatever comes. The holographic display shifted to show new data. Probability curves twisting in impossible ways, reality itself seeming to bend around the human research facility. Dr. Chen's voice continued from the recording. "Look at these readings. We're not just changing how probable certain outcomes are, we're creating new possibilities that didn't exist before. Dr. Martinez, start the secondary containment field. Let's see what happens if we push it further." Xarleth and Vexthor watched in horror as the humans deliberately pushed their experiment beyond safe parameters. The probability field began to pulse, sending ripples through space-time itself. But instead of shutting down the experiment, the humans adjusted their safety protocols and continued. "We have to stop them," Vexthor declared, his gaseous form swirling with determination. "The Council must intervene before they—" A new alert flashed across the holographic display, interrupting him. Xarleth's crystalline form paled as she read the data. "It's too late. They've already started phase 2 of their experiments. They're not just manipulating probability anymore. They're trying to create what they call preferred reality bubbles." The recording showed Dr. Chen standing before her team, her eyes bright with the kind of enthusiasm that made every alien species in the galaxy nervous. Think about it. If we can manipulate the probability of quantum states, why not macro states? Why not entire localized fields of reality? Today we manipulate the probability of an electron's position. Tomorrow, we could manipulate the probability of anything. We could make the improbable probable. We could make the impossible possible. They're trying to weaponize improbability, Sarleth whispered, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had just realized they were watching a catastrophe in slow motion. They're trying to force reality to accept outcomes that should be impossible. Vexthor's gaseous form churned with a mixture of fear and fascination. But that's not how probability works. You can't just tell that to the humans. Sarleth interrupted, gesturing at the display. In the last 3 days, they've achieved results that our scientists declared impossible. They're not just breaking the rules of quantum mechanics, they're rewriting them. The recording showed Dr. Chen making final adjustments to her equipment, initiating full-scale probability field test in 3, 2, 1. The feed suddenly dissolved into static. When it cleared, the laboratory looked exactly the same, except everything that had been on the left side of the room was now on the right, and vice versa. Dr. Chen's excited voice came through clearly. Perfect. Localized reality inversion achieved. Now, who wants to try something really interesting? Sarleth stopped the recording and turned to Vexthor. The Council needs to understand. This isn't just another case for the warning protocol. The humans aren't just asking what's the worst that could happen. They're actively trying to find out, and they're doing it with the kind of determination that reshapes universes. What are you suggesting? Vexthor asked, though his swirling patterns suggested he already knew the answer. We need to implement the human containment protocol, Sarleth stated firmly. Not to stop them. It's too late for that. We need to contain the effects of what they're about to do. Because if there's one thing I've learned about humans, it's that when they ask what's the worst that could happen, they're not expressing concern. They're setting a challenge for themselves. The holographic display flickered one final time, showing Dr. Chen's team preparing for another experiment. Her voice came through clearly, filled with the kind of excitement that had preceded some of humanity's greatest achievements and most spectacular disasters. Hey, what's the worst that could happen if we try to manipulate the probability of probability itself? Sarleth and Vexthor shared a look that transcended their alien physiologies. They both knew that somewhere in the vast expanse of space, in the quantum foam of reality itself, the universe had just shuddered. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the shimmering field of probability distortion, watching as reality itself seemed to hiccup around their latest experiment. The probability manipulation engine hummed with a sound that somehow managed to occur both before and after it was made, a temporal impossibility that had become surprisingly common in the lab these days. Dr. Martinez, she called out, not taking her eyes off the readings. Are you seeing these timeline divergences? We're getting probability echoes from events that haven't happened yet. Her colleague, Dr. Ray Martinez, was frantically typing at his console, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by intense concentration. Sarah, these readings, they're suggesting we're not just creating new probabilities, we're accidentally spawning entire parallel timelines. Look at this. He projected a holographic display that showed dozens of timeline threads sprouting from their experiment, each one representing a different probability state that had somehow become real. The threads twisted and intertwined, creating patterns that shouldn't have been possible in normal spacetime. Oh, Sarah said, a smile spreading across her face. Now that's interesting. In her observation chamber aboard the Galactic Security Council's monitoring station, Sarleth watched the humans with growing alarm. Her crystalline form vibrated at frequencies that would have shattered lesser materials as she tracked the expanding web of probability violations. They're not just manipulating quantum states anymore, she reported to the emergency session of the council, her voice modulating with stress. They're creating actual timeline splits. Each experiment is generating new parallel realities. The council chamber erupted in panic. Various alien species expressed their horror in ways unique to their physiologies, some changing colors, others emitting warning pheromones, and a few simply trying to merge themselves with the nearest wall. High Counselor Vexthor's gaseous form swirled with patterns that indicated severe diplomatic distress. How many timeline splits are we talking about? Kavzarleth's response was interrupted by a new alert from her monitoring systems. The holographic display showed the human laboratory, where Dr. Chen's team was preparing for another test. "Watch," Kavzarleth commanded, her crystalline appendages trembling. "Okay, team," Sarah announced, adjusting the controls on the PME. "We've proven we can create probability splits. Now let's see if we can control them. Ray, what's the worst that could happen if we try to surf these probability waves?" Before anyone could stop him, Ray had already begun reconfiguring the equipment. "Way ahead of you, boss. I've modified the quantum field generators to create a sort of probability surfboard, if you will. In theory, we should be able to ride these timeline splits and choose which one becomes our primary reality." The lab team watched in a mixture of horror and fascination as Ray stepped into the probability field. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then reality itself appeared to stutter, like a video playing at multiple speeds simultaneously. "Ray," Sarah called out, concern edging into her voice. "I'm fine." Multiple versions of Ray's voice answered from slightly different positions in the room. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I'm everywhere the probability field says I could be. And somewhere I definitely shouldn't be, but that's probably fine." In the council chamber, Harleth's monitoring equipment was going haywire. "They're not just creating parallel timelines anymore," she reported, her voice carrying the weight of someone watching a supernova approach their homeworld. "They're learning to navigate between them. The human, Dr. Martins, he exists in multiple probability states simultaneously." "That's impossible," one of the council members declared, their bioluminescent patches flashing with skepticism. "Apparently," Sarleth replied dryly, "someone forgot to tell the humans that." The holographic display showed Ray Martinez stepping out of the probability field, or rather, several Ray Martinezes stepping out, each slightly out of phase with the others, each representing a different probability state that had somehow become real. "Fascinating." Sarah's voice came through the monitoring feed. "Ray, you've created a stable probability cascade. Each version of you represents a different timeline where you made a slightly different choice. How do you feel?" "Well," Ray's voices answered in near unison, "I just won 3 different lotteries in parallel timelines, got food poisoning in 2 others, and in one of them I'm apparently the president of Antarctica. So, pretty good actually." "This is beyond containment," Vexthor declared, his gaseous form now a roiling storm of worry. "We need to shut them down before." Another alert cut through the chamber. The holographic display showed Sarah Chen stepping toward the probability field, her eyes bright with the kind of scientific curiosity that had led humanity to both its greatest triumphs and most spectacular disasters. "Dr. Martinez has proven we can surf individual probability waves," she announced to her team. "Now, what's the worst that could happen if we try to surf all of them at once?" The entire council chamber went silent as they watched Sarah adjust the controls of their machine. Numbers and equations flashed across multiple screens, each one representing calculations that should have been impossible. "Dr. Chen," Ray's multiple voices called out in warning, "the probability field isn't designed for that kind of load. If you try to surf all probability states simultaneously, then we might create a cascade effect that could theoretically rewrite the fundamental laws of cause and effect." Sarah finished, her smile growing wider. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." Kavzarleth's crystalline form paled to near transparency as she watched the human scientist step into the probability field. "By the first law," she whispered, "they're not just breaking reality. They're trying to remake it." The probability field pulsed once, twice, and then expanded exponentially. For a brief moment, every possible version of Sarah Chen existed simultaneously. Scientist, explorer, artist, quantum mechanic, reality surfer, and thousands more. Each one represented a different path her life could have taken, each one now somehow equally real. Initial tests successful. Sarah's voices echoed through multiple probability states. Now let's see what happens when we really push the boundaries. Ray, initiate protocol Omega. No. Sarleth breathed, her crystalline structure resonating with horror as she read the incoming data. They're not. They are, Vex Thor confirmed, his gaseous form condensing with dread. They're trying to create a controlled probability collapse. They want to force all possible timelines to exist simultaneously in a stable state. The council chamber erupted into chaos as the implications became clear. The humans weren't just asking what's the worst that could happen anymore. They were actively trying to make it happen, convinced they could control it. And somewhere in the quantum foam of reality, in the space between possibility and actuality, the universe itself held its breath, wondering what these impossibly reckless creatures would do next. Reality had stopped making sense on a Tuesday, or maybe it was a Wednesday, or possibly both simultaneously. The timestamp on Carleth's emergency report to the Galactic Security Council somehow read next week and last century at the same time. The crystalline security officer's latest report flickered across quantum-encrypted channels, her normally precise documentation now struggling to describe events that were occurring across multiple timelines simultaneously. The human probability experiments have reached critical mass. Reality breaches are no longer contained to their research facility. We're seeing timeline bleed through across entire continental regions. The holographic display showed cities where buildings existed in multiple architectural styles at once, the result of probability waves merging different historical outcomes. Streets that had never been built somehow had always existed, while others that had stood for centuries now had never been there at all. In the council chamber, representatives from 1,000 worlds watched in horror as Dr. Sarah Chen's voice came through the feed, somehow managing to sound both exhausted and exhilarated. The probability cascade is spreading faster than we anticipated. Reality itself is becoming fluid, but we're learning to surf these waves of possibility. We might be able to. Her voice cut off as another reality shift rippled through the laboratory. When the feed stabilized, there were now 3 different versions of the lab existing in the same space, each one representing a different probability state that had somehow become real. Fascinating. Multiple versions of Sarah's voice overlapped. The probability fields are creating stable quantum superpositions of entire locations. Ray, are you seeing this? Dr. Martinez's response came from several different points in space-time, simultaneously. Yeah, but which version of this are you referring to? I'm currently existing in about 7 different probability states, and in 3 of them, I invented pizza before it was historically possible. High Counselor Vex Thor's gaseous form churned with diplomatic anxiety as he addressed the emergency session. We must intervene immediately. The humans have gone beyond merely experimenting with probability. They're rewriting the fundamental structure of reality itself. A task force was quickly assembled. The Council's most advanced chips, carrying their most experienced probability theorists, entered Earth's atmosphere with the intention of stopping the human experiments before they could cause any more damage to the fabric of reality. It was, Carleth would later note in her report, exactly the wrong thing to do. The moment the Council ships entered the spreading probability field, they too began to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Some had never launched their mission. Others had already completed it successfully. A few had somehow become luxury cruise ships instead of military vessels. Oh, this is incredible. Sarah's voice came through the monitoring feed, now tinged with even more excitement. The alien ships are creating new probability interfaces. Ray, quick. What's the worst that could happen if we try to incorporate their quantum signatures into our experiments? Before anyone could stop them, across multiple timelines and probability states, The humans had already begun integrating the alien technology into their own experiments. The result was immediate and spectacular. Reality didn't just bend. It tied itself into a pretzel, then decided that pretzels had never been invented, then retroactively created them in ancient Egypt instead of ancient Germany, then somehow made them exist in all times and places simultaneously. The humans aren't just surfing probability waves anymore. Sarleth reported, her crystalline form vibrating with a mixture of horror and reluctant admiration. They're teaching reality itself new tricks. The holographic displays in the council chamber showed impossible events occurring across Earth. Buildings that had been destroyed in one timeline were being reconstructed by probability echoes from timelines where they had never fallen. People were remembering multiple versions of their lives simultaneously, somehow remaining sane despite experiencing dozens of different possible life paths at once. And at the center of it all, in their lab that now existed in multiple probability states simultaneously, Sarah Chen and her team were not trying to stop the chaos. They were trying to understand it, control it, and somehow use it to their advantage. The probability cascade is approaching universal saturation, Sarah announced, her voice echoing across multiple versions of reality. Soon, every possible timeline will exist simultaneously. But here's the interesting part. We're starting to see patterns in the chaos. The probability waves aren't just random. They're forming some kind of structure. Ray's voice cut in from several different probability states. Sarah, these readings, they're suggesting that reality itself is trying to adapt to what we're doing. It's like the universe is learning how to handle multiple probability states existing simultaneously. In the council chamber, Harleth's latest report caused several species to spontaneously evolve new organs specifically designed to express their anxiety. The humans have moved beyond merely breaking reality. They're teaching it new rules. They're somehow convincing the universe that impossible things can, should, and therefore must exist. A new alert drew everyone's attention back to the holographic display. Sarah Chen stood in her lab, or rather, several versions of her stood in several versions of her lab, all existing simultaneously, all working on the same impossible problem. We've proven that multiple probability states can exist simultaneously. Her voices echoed across reality itself. Now, what's the worst that could happen if we try to make them work together? The universe, which had already been having a very strange day, or week, or century, or all of them at once, seemed to hold its breath. In the council chamber, Harleth's crystalline form resonated with a realization that was both terrifying and somehow inspiring. The humans weren't just breaking reality anymore. They were going to try to fix it by breaking it even more thoroughly, in exactly the right way, to make it come back together stronger than before. And somewhere in the quantum foam of existence, in the space between what was possible and what was actual, reality itself began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, these strange human creatures might actually know what they were doing. In a lab that existed in 7 different probability states simultaneously, Dr. Sarah Chen was having an epiphany. The kind of epiphany that either saved universes or accidentally erased them from existence. The kind that made other species in the galaxy develop new nervous systems just to properly worry about it. We've been thinking about this all wrong, she announced to the various versions of her team, each existing in their own probability state, but somehow all paying attention at once. We're not causing reality to break down. We're causing it to evolve. On the council observation deck, Sarleth's crystalline form vibrated with concern as she watched the humans reach yet another terrifying conclusion. Behind her, High Counselor Vexthor's gaseous form swirled with patterns that somehow managed to convey both diplomatic anxiety and morbid curiosity. Look at these patterns, Sarah continued, gesturing to displays showing probability waves interfering with each other across multiple timelines. Reality isn't falling apart. It's trying to adapt. It's learning how to handle multiple probability states existing simultaneously. We just need to help it along. Dr. Ray Martinez, currently existing in 5 different versions, one of which had somehow become a professional juggler in this timeline, leaned forward to study the data. "Sarah, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "Oh no," Carleth whispered, her crystalline structure paling as she realized what the humans were about to propose. "What's the worst that could happen?" Sarah asked, her eyes bright with the kind of scientific madness that had led humanity to both their greatest triumphs and most spectacular advances. "If we deliberately destabilize reality even further, but in a controlled way." The council chamber erupted into chaos. Various alien species began expressing their horror in uniquely physiological ways, some changing colors rapidly, others emitting mourning pheromones, and a few simply trying to phase-shift themselves out of existence temporarily. "They can't be serious," one council member chittered, their exoskeleton rattling with anxiety. "Deliberately making things worse." "That's exactly what they're proposing," Carleth confirmed, her voice modulating with a mixture of horror and reluctant admiration. "They want to break reality even more thoroughly, but in a precise way that forces it to rebuild itself stronger." On the holographic display, Sarah was already explaining her theory. "Think of it like controlled demolition. Sometimes, to fix a damaged building, you need to carefully break it further so you can rebuild it properly. Reality is trying to adapt to multiple probability states existing at once. We just need to guide that adaptation by breaking physics even more." Ray's multiple voices asked, somehow managing to sound both skeptical and excited across all probability states. "Exactly." Sarah's enthusiasm was palpable across multiple timelines. "We'll call it the Controlled Chaos Protocol. We'll create specific probability cascades that force reality to develop new rules for handling multiple states of existence." In the council chamber, Vexthor's gaseous form condensed with worry. "This is madness. They're proposing to deliberately destabilize reality itself." "No," Tarleth corrected, her crystalline form resonating with sudden understanding. "They're proposing to teach reality new tricks. They're not trying to break it. They're trying to upgrade it." A holographic display showed Sarah's team already beginning their preparations. Multiple versions of the same equipment existed simultaneously, each calibrated slightly differently, all working together in ways that shouldn't have been possible. "Think about it," Sarah explained as she worked, her voice echoing across probability states. "Reality already handles quantum superposition at the microscopic level. Particles can exist in multiple states until they're observed. We're just extending that principle to a macro scale and teaching the universe how to handle it without collapsing." Ray added, his multiple versions working in perfect synchronization despite existing in different probability states. "We're not breaking physics, we're helping it evolve." "Precisely." Sarah's smile was visible across all versions of reality. "Now who wants to help me rewrite the fundamental laws of existence?" In the council chamber, Tarleth turned to address the assembled representatives. "We have a choice to make," she announced, her crystalline form glowing with determination. "We can either try to stop them, which, given our previous attempts, will probably just make things more interesting, or we can help them." "Help them." Vexthor's gaseous form swirled with disbelief. "Help them break reality even further." "Help them fix it," Tarleth corrected. "Because if there's one thing I've learned about humans, it's that they have an uncanny ability to turn disaster into progress. They don't just ask what's the worst that could happen. They figure out how to make the worst thing that could happen work in their favor." The holographic display showed Sarah's team making final adjustments to their equipment. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath as the humans prepared to deliberately push the universe beyond its breaking point, confident that they could guide it toward a new and better state of existence. Beginning Controlled Chaos Protocol in 3, 2, 1. Sarah's voice echoed across multiple timelines. "Now let's see what happens when we break reality in exactly the right way." And somewhere in the quantum foam of existence, in the space between what was and what could be, the universe itself began to wonder if maybe these strange, Reckless, brilliant humans might be onto something after all. The moment before Dr. Sarah Chen activated the controlled chaos protocol, reality existed in a state that physics had never been designed to handle. Multiple probability states overlapped across the planet. Timelines twisted together like quantum spaghetti, and the fundamental laws of existence were holding emergency meetings to figure out what to do about these troublesome humans. In the Galactic Council's observation chamber, Hexarleth watched as humanity prepared to either save reality or break it so thoroughly that breaking it would become the new normal. Her crystalline form refracted light in patterns that somehow managed to convey both terrified anticipation and grudging admiration. Final preparations complete, Sarah announced across multiple probability states simultaneously. Reality stabilization matrices are online, quantum probability anchors are in position, and we've got enough processing power to calculate pi to the last digit, which is now somehow both 3 and 7 thanks to our recent timeline mergings. Are we absolutely sure about this? High Counselor Vexthor's gaseous form swirled with diplomatic concern, deliberately destabilizing reality even further. With all due respect, Counselor, Sarah replied, her voice echoing across several versions of existence. Reality is already thoroughly destabilized. We're not going to fix it by being cautious. Sometimes you have to break something completely to understand how to put it back together properly. Dr. Ray Martinez, currently existing in 9 different probability states, one of which had somehow become a professional quantum yodeler, checked the final calculations. Controlled chaos protocol is ready. All probability matrices are aligned. We're as prepared as we can be to deliberately break physics in exactly the right way. Sarah took a deep breath, or rather, several versions of her took several deep breaths across multiple timelines, initiating final sequence. And hey, what's the worst that could happen? The entire council chamber groaned in unison, the sound somehow occurring both before and after the words were spoken. Activating controlled chaos protocol in 3, 2, 1. Reality didn't just bend. It turned itself inside out, took a good look at its own underlying structure, and decided to try something new. Probability waves that had been interfering with each other suddenly began to harmonize. Timeline splits that had been causing chaos started forming patterns. The very fabric of existence, which had been stretched to its breaking point, didn't just break, it evolved. It's working. Sarah's voice carried across probability states with increasing excitement. The quantum feedback loops are stabilizing. Reality is learning to handle multiple states simultaneously. On the observation deck, Xarlet's monitoring equipment was showing impossible readings. Impossible not because they were breaking physics, but because physics itself was adapting to accommodate them. They're not just fixing reality, she reported, her crystalline form vibrating with astonishment. They're upgrading it, teaching it new tricks. The universe is learning how to handle multiple probability states existing simultaneously without collapsing. Across Earth, the effects were becoming visible. Buildings that had been existing in multiple architectural styles simultaneously settled into new forms that somehow incorporated elements from each probability state. People who had been experiencing multiple timeline memories found themselves able to access the wisdom and experience from each version of their lives. Phase 2 initiating, Ray announced, his multiple versions working in perfect synchronization. Beginning probability wave harmonization. The universe, which had been having a very strange day, or week, or century, or all of them at once, seemed to pause for a moment. Then, like a massive instrument finding a new note, reality itself began to resonate with the human's adjustments. We're seeing quantum coherence across all probability states, Sarah reported, her excitement building. The universe is adapting to handle multiple timelines simultaneously. It's learning to maintain stability across parallel probability states. In the council chamber, various alien species watched in amazement as the humans didn't just fix reality. They improved it. The fundamental laws of physics weren't breaking anymore. They were evolving, expanding to accommodate new possibilities that had never existed before. Final phase complete, Sarah announced, her voice now perfectly synchronized across all probability states. Reality stabilization achieved. And we might have accidentally given the universe an upgrade in the process. The holographic displays showed the results of their experiment. Earth, which had been the epicenter of the probability chaos, now existed in a state that somehow maintained multiple probability lines simultaneously without conflict. The universe hadn't just survived the humans asking, "What's the worst that could happen?" It had learned from them. Remarkable. Sarleth breathed, her crystalline form glowing with amazement. They didn't just fix the problem. They turned it into an advancement. They took the worst thing that could happen and made it into the best thing that could happen. High Counselor Vexthor's gaseous form swirled with patterns that indicated both relief and bewilderment. So, it's over? They actually succeeded. Oh, it's definitely not over. Sarah's voice came through the comm system, still carrying that tone of scientific excitement that made other species develop new nervous systems just to worry properly. Now that we've taught the universe how to handle multiple probability states, we have so many new questions to explore. For instance, what's the worst that could happen if we try to? No. The entire council chamber erupted in unified protest. I'm kidding. Sarah laughed, her voice now perfectly synchronized across all probability states. Mostly. But you have to admit, asking that question did lead us to make some pretty impressive discoveries. Sometimes, the worst thing that could happen turns out to be exactly what needs to happen. And somewhere in the quantum foam of existence, in the space between what was and what could be, the universe itself seemed to chuckle. These humans, with their dangerous questions and their even more dangerous solutions, had somehow managed to teach reality itself new tricks. They had taken the worst that could happen and turned it into the best that could happen. The universe, it seemed, would never be quite the same. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what it needed.